Silent Hill 4 The Room is the final Silent Hill title of the Team Silent quadrilogy. First released in June 17, 2004 in Japan, it has been dubbed by many as the most divisive game in the entire series, and by some, not even a Silent Hill game.
Oh man.
To me, it is an important and interesting title, with lots of innovative features. In this video, we will be looking at everything that this title has to offer, from its early development and key features to its story, music, gameplay and more. Please sit back and enjoy as we take a look at Silent Hill 4 The Room. Let's begin by going back to the second installment of the franchise. The main criticism of Silent Hill 2 upon its release was that it didn't feel anything like the first game, and fans weren't engaged with this unfamiliar narrative, and so leading to the development of a new title following 2, Team Silent wanted to divide their staff into two groups. Those who would continue what we understand to be traditional Silent Hill plot and ambience, which would be Silent Hill 3, and another group who would take a more experimental route. This group would go on to propose a title that would embrace those who did enjoy Silent Hill 2, and therefore the wider gaming community. They weren't looking to serve fans of a traditional Silent Hill story, as this was already being catered to by the team working on 3. Instead, this title would aim to take new strides in its narrative and gameplay development that addressed the needs of fans outside of the Silent Hill fanbase. And this meant creating a title that tried to be different, but that's not to say it was never a Silent Hill game. The fourth Silent Hill game would first be coined with Silent Hill just as its subtitle, emphasising that this is indeed a new direction for the team and series, but not an abandonment of the franchise by any means. Although many fans, even to this day, believe that this was an entirely different project that was just given the Silent Hill title much later into development. This is simply not true, as it was always going to be a game in the Silent Hill catalogue, but just one that was purposely different from the beginning. The direction this team would take would be action, embracing the ever-growing amount of thrill-seeking gamers who were always in abundance compared to those who preferred the slower, psychological genre Silent Hill was known for. This meant making brave decisions early on into the game's development, and not just for its story, but gameplay needed to change as well. Pre-production of Silent Hill 4 began in fall 2001. Similar to the early production of Silent Hill 2, ideas and input for a new story were proposed by almost all members of the team, where they would all decide on the best one. The most favourable developing story was one that would immerse the player in a world that was not only the scariest yet, but also the most intuitive and responsive. The team wanted to develop a world that would allow the player to be absolutely immersed in their story. It was paramount that this title embraced the ever-growing freedom players were given in other games. This would be achieved by creating a centralised location for the player, which will be their hub of activity, where they can find notes and turn on electronics of their locale to learn more about the story, witness and fix horrific events, play on their own curiosity, organise their item selection, or simply relax. It was this idea that would not just enhance the player experience of Silent Hill 4, but also motivate the need to create a narrative that reflects this location, and this is where we find The Room. The Room is the main location of Silent Hill 4, where the player can voluntarily engage with many items that could go so far as to explore the story further, or in a different way than the player might interpret. But the inspiration for a story wasn't driven by any centralised room, it was a building complex, an apartment, a home. The team wanted to create a terror that invaded the very space where you thought you were safe, adopting a first-person camera view to heighten the sense of claustrophobia and focus on the environment. This would also put a focus on player interaction, making the experience within the room much more real. Silent Hill 4 would also welcome themes of old Japanese folklore, primarily the appearance of ghosts and phantoms. Considering that the team were all from Japan, this was a mythology that they were more accustomed to, compared to themes and ideas that were used in previous titles. The entire team understood what makes a typical ghost story creepy. It was around this time as well that Japanese horror had skyrocketed in the media, even in the West, and this only encouraged the involvement of ghostly beings. This game would borrow some new technologies that were being worked on alongside Silent Hill 3, like its multiple moving texture layers which give this active infection look to characters and environments. These movements, especially when seen up close, can be disgustingly immersive. This programming innovation was utilised perfectly with the real-time rendering of some of the room's hauntings. Another clever development for this game is how some scenes play out during gameplay. Compared to previous titles of the series, which would rely almost entirely on full motion video or pre-rendered cutscenes, this game would also feature character events that begin when the player is nearby. This meant that the player could choose to engage with parts of the story however they wish, with no breaks to its immersion. They could approach and listen to a responsive character, or choose to walk away entirely, allowing them to be fully immersed into a world that lets them engage however they wish. This was important as it could change the way that the player may understand or interpret elements of the game, especially character details. Players could choose to dive into the story through its various notes, character dialogue, and pacing the story at their leisure. Others could quite literally run from conversations and interactions, getting to those juicy bits of gameplay much sooner and smoother. No longer was this an experience with just one way of playing. If you wanted to take it slow, you could. And if you wanted to just take part in the action, you could do that too, all with the game's immersion fully intact. Of course, optional notes and encounters aren't entirely new to the series, but Silent Hill 4 really made a point of making you feel like everything was an option, whether that was how often you revisited the room and by extension, the possible encounters along the way, or how in-depth you want to investigate each character. This game was yours to live in. With that said, let's take a look at how the team wanted to approach this game's cast of characters and themes. Team Silent wanted to develop a range of characters that demonstrated a strong sense of normality. Not to say that these characters are normal within their persona, but their appearance, personalities and justification for being in this story are all so easily understood and typical of everyday people who we may come across. This certainly heightens the sense of unease as we enter the other world and see these characters, who often look rather misplaced in this murky environment. That isn't to say other characters of the series simply fit right into the horrors of Silent Hill, of course, but Cynthia's bright outfit in the otherwise dull environment, young Walter's innocent attire with the soft cotton jumper that's slightly baggy for him, and Eileen's gentle summery pastel colours all speak about who these people are within their lives. They are humans that we could just imagine seeing in real life. Just to reiterate, I'm not saying that we can't envision a cop like Sybil Bennett or a detective like Douglas in the real world, but it's so much easier to place the cast of Silent Hill 4 within real life scenarios, because that's how they are meant to be shown. It feels as though these characters really do exist, and that goes beyond their physical appearance and general attributes. We can nosily spy on Eileen through a hole in the apartment wall as she relaxes on her bed. See Frank Sunderland going about his daily tasks as the apartment superintendent. Mate, you can look out the apartment window and spectate the world literally going by with or without you. The point is, this game made a leap to not just make a story that you are a part of, but a world that will continue regardless if you watch it or not. These people and their environments feel so alive. Silent Hill 4 The Room features a protagonist who reminds me of previous leads in the series, mainly for his average guy look and feel. He is for sure the quietest of the titles so far, and I felt as though he was more of a canvas for me to express how I was feeling throughout the game, which makes sense given the development targets being created for the game was that to immerse you as the individual player. I enjoyed this approach as I never seemed to shout at Henry for expressing himself differently to how I felt as a player, or he never seemed overtly confused when I wasn't either. Henry's personality, or rather lack thereof, actually allowed me to openly immerse myself in his shoes. I'm not sure if this was the intention however, but that's just how I felt. As for Henry's persona, he is quiet and calm, perhaps a little shy too when we see more of his personality and interactions with others. There is also no mention of Henry's family, friends or his occupation, although it may be considered that he's a photographer. He doesn't speak much generally, and even his neighbours don't really know much about him. He just really is a normal, introverted guy. Silent Hill 4's character designer Naomi Hara said, "For this title we had a concept where we wanted to bring out the realistic, everyday aspects of the game. So the main character, Henry, isn't this super cool guy with anything special about him. We designed him to emphasise the idea that he's just an ordinary man you could find anywhere, who just happens to be living in this ordinary apartment." But of course, this is no ordinary apartment. I'm now going to briefly discuss the early history of Room 302. specifically the people who have lived there. Hopefully this can help clarify some frequently asked questions regarding the room, but also demonstrate just one way that Team Silent would provide detail for specific backstories. Room 302 is an apartment within South Ashfield Heights. It was occupied by a couple who were the parents of Walter Sullivan. The couple abandoned the apartment and left their baby Walter behind. Superintendent Frank Sunderland gave the baby to the nearby St. Jerome's Hospital, and he kept Walter's umbilical cord that he found in a box in his room. Following this incident was another occupant of room 302, Joseph. Joseph was a journalist who coincidentally was investigating a serial killer case that involved Walter Sullivan many years after he was abandoned in this room. He would also investigate and write articles on the Wish House orphanage and the cult that operates it. We can find one of these articles in Brookhaven Hospital in Silent Hill 3. It reads,
Hope House, an orphanage on the outskirts of Silent Hill. But behind its false image is a place where children are kidnapped and brainwashed. Hope House is managed by the Silent Hill Smile Support Society, a charity organization sometimes called 4S. It's true that 4S is a well-respected charity that takes in poor children without homes and raises them with hope. But at its heart, it is a heathen organization that teaches its own warped dogma in lieu of good religious values. Mr. Smith, who lives near Hope House, had this to say. Sometimes at night, I can hear their weird prayers and sounds of crying. I went to complain one time, but they ran me right out. Since then, it hasn't changed a bit. In fact, this reporter was refused admission when he attempted to take photographs in the facility. What exactly do these folks at Hope House have to hide? During my investigations, I was able to discover, however, a suspicious-looking round concrete tower, which appears to be part of their facilities. Unfortunately, no one was willing to tell us what the tower was used for, but it seems unlikely that it has anything to do with the business of raising orphans. It may in fact be a prison or a secret place of worship. The cult religion that operates Hope House is known by the locals simply as the Order. It's a religion that is deeply interwoven with Silent Hill's history, but its worshippers' fervent belief that they are among the elite, chosen people has a dark and dangerous side. I intend to continue my investigation of Hope House and the cult behind it. I've always believed that telling the whole truth and showing the children the true path is our most important duty.
For clarification, this article in Silent Hill 3 calls the orphanage Hope House, but in Silent Hill 4 is named Wish House, although they are the same orphanage. Strangely, Joseph disappeared. Not just from the room, mind you, but entirely. The room's next occupant is our friend Henry, who makes the apartment his own by hosting his range of photographs, including Toluca Lake and Balkan Church, both locations within Silent Hill. After 2 years of being here, Henry finds that he is getting frequent nightmares and eventually finds himself locked in his apartment, which is where we first meet him at the beginning of our story. We will discuss more about the room and the elements within as we explore the story of Silent Hill 4. Now, with an understanding of what the team wants us to develop and who we are playing as and what the location we are dealing with is, it's time for us to experience Silent Hill 4: The Room. As is the case with the majority of Silent Hill titles, this game begins with an opening nightmare sequence. I personally felt like the openings of Silent Hill 1 and 3 were quite a novelty, not necessarily a tutorial as such, but an introduction to the horrors that you might expect later on. Silent Hill 4, on the other hand, begins with a sequence that I believe actually adds to the entire narrative, not just for the sake of being in the room itself, but in how we are immediately thrown off with this scream. I wanted to talk about this opening as I thought the choice to make it this intense and grotesque wasn't just for the sake of being consistent with previous titles, but actually one that would just set the tone for its own story. You have to think, all of the promotion leading up to the release of Silent Hill 4 was all about the room. The posters, the trailers, the opening vignette, the title of the game even. Everything that you've heard about this was about the room. And yet immediately, you want to get out of it. This opening sets a few things up for later on. It makes every visit back to the room slightly more uncomfortable than it would have been otherwise, not to mention the various hauntings that take place throughout the story. We'll get onto that later, but this opening also shows that the room is the problem, that there's something bad here, haunting, almost human-like about it. Fortunately, we are reassured that this was just a nightmare, as we see Henry, the game's protagonist, waking up after this opening sequence. He gets out of bed and then we take control, able to inspect the apartment for some brief context behind his various photographs. The phone rings to Henry's surprise, strange not because the person on the other side is asking him for help, but because the phone isn't even plugged in.
Hello?
Help me.
What?
We then continue our first roam of the apartment by heading to the front door as Henry reflects on how he's been locked in, and we can observe the chains and a weird note on the door that says, "Don't go out, Walter." We can check out the contents of his fridge, find our items box, television and other key items that we'll be returning to later. You can also look through the peephole on the front door, where we can see Henry's neighbour Eileen, who has dropped her shopping outside and mentions a party to herself before walking off, uncovering 15 red handprints on the wall behind her. What's most interesting for us though is the two notes within the apartment, one under the front door reading, "Mum, why doesn't you wake up?" and the other behind the bookcase that mentions the ritual of the Holy Assumption and goes on to describe another world that is ever changing and spirits that are in that world are trapped forever. I'm not going to be reading every note and memo that we can find, but I wanted to mention these two as they set up two stories, one being young Walter who is addressing the room, and the other being the understanding of ghosts, hauntings and other dimensions or worlds. Henry is then drawn to the window where we can see a polygon babe heading down to the subway. He's then alerted by a crashing noise coming from the back of the apartment. Here we can find his bathroom, which now has a giant hole in the wall. This is going to be how Henry can get out of his apartment here on in, as he removes the pipe blocking the hole, giving us our first weapon and access to escape. This hole, strangely, transitions into the subway world. Here we find Cynthia, who is very upfront and claims that this is all just a dream. Her dream, mind you. Her and Henry talk and she asks him for help in finding the exit in return for a special favour.
Help me find it. I'm kinda scared all alone. I'll do a special favor for you later. It's just a dream, so I might as well have some fun.
Just moments after meeting Cynthia, she runs into the bathroom. Henry waits for her, but is soon disturbed by our first enemy of the game, these cannibalistic dogs. Henry walks past these and into the woman's bathroom, where there's another hole that leads us back to room 302. Where Henry reawakens and is now unsure if he was just in his own dream or someone else's. Within the room itself, you'll notice that a few things have changed already. The cabinet within the living room has moved slightly, and we find a pistol behind it, and a message carved into the wall that reads as though someone was stuck here previously, like this room is another dimension, and only they are locked in it. This message also mentions Eileen, who we can now nosily spy on through the small crack in the wall as she picks up a broom to clear up her shit in the hallway. By the way, throughout the game when we return to room 302, you can go back to this hole and spy on Eileen, and she might be doing various different tasks around the room. Sometimes she's there, sometimes she's not. That's a nice little feature. The phone in the bedroom then rings again, and we hear Cynthia pleading for our help, who says that there is a token should we need it.
If you need a token, there's one here.
Going back through the tunnel in the bathroom leads us back to the subway women's toilets, where there's now a statue of Cynthia holding a coin for the Lynch Street line, which we then access. The next area of the subway can be quite overwhelming, or at least it was for me, as ghosts start to come through the walls after us. What makes this worse is the groaning and static noise that replaces the old radio noise from previous Silent Hill games. We save Cynthia from the cart before losing her once again, in a room near the second train line, which is incredibly aggravating. As we now enter this really disgusting flesh-like room, now things start to feel like Silent Hill's otherworld that we're familiar with, as the subway begins to get even deeper, both in physical depth and anatomical resemblance. the least of which being the actual corpses we see stuck around the place, but there's also these strange wall men on the escalators. By the way, fuck these guys. Anyways, Cynthia has told us over the intercom that she's found an exit before saying,
Hurry! Hurry! It's him! He's coming!
We do find Cynthia once again, as she is now laying in a pool of her own blood, with the numbers 16 out of 21 carved into her chest. This might be one of the weirder scenes of the game, and not because of the obvious pool of blood and Cynthia dying, but because of the way that Henry handles the situation.
Are you okay?
Now, Cynthia, interestingly, is still certain that this is all a dream. This would be encouraging for the players, except we then wake up once again back in room 302, in which Henry can look out the window and see an ambulance beside the subway. Now, you might be thinking, well, this isn't an issue. Let me just climb through the hole back in the bathroom and head back to the subway. Okay, now, where the fuck is this? Henry is now in a forest world where there's a car that contains some notes from a guy who says that whenever he goes to a cold place, he gets really thirsty. Same. There's also a memo which will be a good guide for this forest, which I really appreciated, as it tells you which way is north, which way is south, but most importantly is that the dug up key that we will find later on won't let us go back, and we must put it somewhere before we try to return. This is one of those classic inventory management scenarios where if you choose to bring the key with you, you'll be caught in a loop within the forest, but if you choose to leave it in your inventory box back at the room, you can then progress. There's a lot of reasons you need to revisit the room, but that's quite on brand. There are even some instances where you need to return for really surprising and sometimes weird items in order to progress outside the room. You'll see what I mean. We then meet Jasper, the man whose notes we found in the car, who gives us a bit of a history lesson about the natives of the area and the nearby orphanage which lies just down the path. Jasper reappears here and offers us a spade in return for a drink. To give him a drink, we need to head back to room 302 and grab some chocolate milk from our fridge for Jasper. See what I mean? Now, moments before we met Jasper at the orphanage and gave him his chocolate milk, we can come across a young Walter Sullivan, someone who we can also learn a bit more about within the orphanage itself, as some notes are left scattered around that tell us about Walter's progress at the orphanage, and it also dates his time there, as it also mentions Alessa Gillespie. There's a scream at the back of the orphanage where we then find Jasper, who is now burning to death as he shrieks that he saw the Red Devil who he'd been looking for all this time. He also has carved into his chest the numbers 17 out of 21. Henry then wakes back up in the room. There's some general fuckery going on, including Superintendent Frank Sunderland trying to open our door to no avail. What's more, the number of handprints on the wall behind him has now gone up to 17. Heading back through the bathroom hole leads us to another new world entirely. We then wake up in this water prison world. Henry presumably smells the damp and disgusting walls, but can also hear a man down the corridor screaming for help to get out. Approaching the man, he tells us that Walter is going to find him and kill him. We now have quite a fun puzzle, which is to manipulate the very building that we're in. To do this, we have to head outside and climb to the top of the water prison, where we can open the water gate on the roof and let the light flow in. We then must head to the central shaft, where we can turn the valves to the second and third floors, with an aim to align the holes within the cells so that Henry can jump down and see within the kitchen. Through doing this, we were also able to free the man in the cell, who we then see speaking to young Walter. The man introduces himself as Andrew DeSalvo, a man who used to work back at the orphanage, who claims that it was actually a centre of a religion that Walter was a victim to. By turning the valves, we can also progress through the water prison by accessing the keypad in the kitchen that we can now see. There was a memo within the third floor surveillance room that tells us the code for this, which is 0302. Walking through the door, we then see Andrew once again, but this time he is dead with the numbers 18 out of 21 carved into his stomach. Henry, of course, wakes up back in room 302. Now, there has been something going on throughout this story that I haven't mentioned until now, and I feel like this is a good point to discuss it, considering what we know so far. So each of the different worlds that we have visited has ended with the person we meet within that world dying and having a number carved into their torso. They have all interacted or mentioned him being young Walter Sullivan. Now, following Andrew's death, we come across a note on the floor of the apartment that tells us a bit more about the 21 Sacraments and how 10 people were killed in a variety of ways within 10 days, and each person had a number carved into their body out of 21. What's interesting about these 10 people is that their sacrifice follows a particular theme, which is outlined within the Descent of the Holy Mother book found back in the orphanage. This book includes 4 signs that outline the various themes necessary for the 21 Sacraments. This includes temptation, which is the theme given to Cynthia for her flirtatious personality. Source, which is given to Jasper for being the source of the fire that burns down the orphanage, but also for being the person that was at the source which encouraged its teachings onto Walter. And watchfulness, which was given to Andrew for his job at the orphanage, watching over the children. This is also a good time to mention that for every death that we've come across so far, we had also found a placard soon before it, corresponding to the relevant themes of each individual. And this is how we can define exactly who represents what within the 21 Sacraments. For example, we saw the source placard just before we saw Jasper die. Not only is it clear that these deaths are part of the 21 Sacraments, but returning to the room shows us some events which tell us that these deaths are real and ongoing. For example, after Cynthia's death, we can hear from the ambulance crew that there may be a copycat killer of the late Walter Sullivan, and after Jasper's death, we hear a news report that the latest death is being investigated as a link to Walter.
To the marks on the victim, the police are investigating possible links to the Walter Sullivan case 10 years ago.
I mention this at this point in the story as the game will now kick it up a notch and make the points I've just made a little more blatant. We see Eileen and Frank trying to get into room 302, but Frank can't unlock the door and elicits to this happening once before with the previous occupant. He then goes on to say it reminds him of the umbilical cord that he has beginning to smell.
The umbilical cord I keep in a box in my room. Lately it's started to smell terrible.
Huh? Umbilical cord?
Weird. Heading back to the bathroom, the hole is now a lot bigger, and we go through it to enter another new world. This is Building World, which introduces this really uncomfortable, narrow and windy environment, and the gumhead enemies. We are also introduced to Richard, a neighbour who we can spot through one of the peephole events earlier in the game, who absolutely fucks it into the floor.
Ouch! Damn it.
To Henry's absolute shock, if you can call this shock, Richard is completely fine and gets up, almost like he's been dropped into this world completely fine by some god. Richard tells us about the previous occupant of our apartment who locked himself away and would never come out. He seems aware of what's going on, almost like this is all too familiar to him. We warn him about the young boy Walter, which is wise considering he's been nothing but a pest for everyone we've met so far, and that's putting it lightly. We then wander through some stores, avoiding enemies along the way, before we see Richard once again, who has found Walter, questioning his involvement as to what's going on here. There's a bar towards the bottom of the building world past all the stores that tells us of the code to unlocking the door at the back. It says that the code is found on a billboard outside, which we can actually see when we revisit our apartment. I also wanted to add as well that this is one of my favourite moments coming back to the apartment in my playthrough, as I came during this really nice golden hour and I don't know, it just felt really cozy. Anyway, now using this code to get through the back door of the bar and heading upstairs, we find a chaos placard. We also find Richard, who is tied down to an electric chair with the numbers 19 out of 21 carved into his forehead. He's stuttering the words, "That's not a kid," as the vaults shock him to death. Referring to Walter, the young boy who is stood behind the chair pointing out the window before he vanishes. Back in room 302, we hear a transmission between a policeman about another death, a description of the numbers that we just saw on Richard's body, and another reference to this potentially being a copycat killer of Walter Sullivan.
Looks like another one, Captain. got 121 on his head. It's just like that case from 10 years ago. Yeah, that Walter Sullivan case. But Sullivan's dead. They even got the body. Must be some crazy copycat. Yeah, but even so...
Continuing to appreciate this nice golden hour, we can peek out the window before we see a man in the apartment opposite who is pointing out of the window more towards our left. We can check to the left of our apartment by peeking through the hole in the wall as we see Eileen getting ready for the party that she mentioned earlier. The hole in the bathroom is now getting bigger and takes us somewhere familiar for once. This time it takes us to an alternate version of South Ashfield Heights apartments. As we stand up, we see a man with long blonde hair and a blue coat, identical to the man that we saw pointing outside our apartment. He is knocking next door for Eileen. Henry can now begin finally exploring the apartments that are so close, yet so far from the room that he keeps returning to. First, we can explore the room next to ours to find the diary belonging to the tenant of this room, Mike. Mike says that the previous occupant of our room, Joseph, was beginning to act strange, looking like he'd been working super hard lately and not showing his face around much. There's also some keys and an article written by Joseph, the same article I had mentioned during the introduction, which was found in Silent Hill 3. There's also a lot of strange things within Mike's apartment, but we'll cover this in a moment. Heading down the corridor, we find young Walter, who is knocking on our apartment door and yelling out for his mum before he soon vanishes. There is also a red note, like the notes that we keep receiving under our door. We can't enter our room, nor can we enter Eileen's. That said, as we continue exploring the building, we can find the man in the blue coat who is sitting on the staircase outside. He's holding on to a shabby doll, which he says Eileen had given him a long time ago, back when she was younger than him. He says that she looked so happy holding her mother's hand before handing us the shabby doll as a gift. Before walking away, we can prompt the man again, who repeats to us that Eileen really did look so happy holding onto her mother's hand.
She was so young then. So happy with life. Just holding on to her mother's hand.
Roaming around the apartment, we find the superintendent's room, which contains some keys as expected, but another diary which explains more about the umbilical cord statement he mentioned earlier. He says that 30 years ago, a couple had abandoned their newborn baby in room 302, our room, running off just like thieves in the night. The superintendent reflects on this horrible event and hopes that the baby is okay, admitting that he can't bring himself to throw away even the awful smelling umbilical cord that was found with the abandoned baby. There's a hole nearby that transports us back to the room where we throw the shabby doll in the bin. Fuck that shit. Only to find that the man in the blue coat is now waiting at our door watching us. Okay, I'll be taking that back. Back in the apartment world now, we have to do a bit of fetching as we go from room to room, uncovering the different personalities of every tenant and gathering the various red notes along the way, and popping them underneath the door to our room. The only way you can read these notes is by heading back to our room and retrieving the notes from inside. Now, usually I don't really like fetch quests like this, but I feel like this actually built some suspense for the contents of each note, as I was able to grasp the full context of all of them at once I revisited the room. There's a few things that we can learn from these notes. The first comes from Mike, the tenant who I mentioned previously. This note was written to his lover, who also lives within the apartments. She's a young nurse called Rachel. This note expresses his stalkerish love for her, which became even more creepy considering his obsession with pornographic magazines, and that's the strange things that I was on about. Rachel, by the way, was also the nurse mentioned in Silent Hill 2, being the carer for Mary Sunderland and Laura. What's more, there's a few items of Mike's that we can find that tell a bit more of his story, like his bloody clothes throughout the apartment and a cassette tape that can be played back in Henry's tape deck.
How do you like that, you sick little freak? You had it coming to you. These clothes are disgusting. Get them out of my sight.
I know. It'll be perfect to wrap his body in.
Hold it.
You!
Hold it, I think
You snooping around again?
Myself.
Get your ass out of here before you really piss me off!
Hold it. I think I'll keep that one for myself. Hold it. I think I'll keep that one for myself.
This cassette, aptly named Skinned Mike, plays the moment where Richard Braintree has had enough of Mike's behaviour, beats him and rips his clothes off him. Since Walter had actually seen that ordeal take place, he's always seen Richard as a vicious and cruel man, making him the sign of chaos that we saw earlier on his placard. There is also another note from Joseph that describes the history of Walter Sullivan and his previous murders. These once again allude to the possibility of a copycat killer, as it could never be possible that Walter has continued his spree since he's dead. The notes describe the Walter Sullivan case and ask why did he kill himself before completing his task. Finally, there are more notes from Joseph that suggest he has keys to Eileen's room, but he lost it near the bed. Obviously he didn't look too hard, did he? We could then go back to the apartment world and unlock Eileen's room, where we see a young Walter now standing over her as she's bleeding out. She has the numbers 20 out of 21 carved into her back. Now strangely, she is actually crawling towards the boy, telling him to get out as this place is dangerous, and ask him if he's found his mummy. Now based on the deaths so far, each character represents a sign of the 21 sacraments. You could probably now make an accurate guess here as to what Eileen represents. I won't spoil it yet if you're unsure, but it will be uncovered soon. Back in our apartment now, we can see an ambulance that is taking Eileen to St. Jerome's Hospital. We can peek through the wall and find Eileen's Robbie the Rabbit toy now pointing towards us. There's also some officers that are talking about the incident and how these recent murders are just like that Walter Sullivan case. And one of them suggests that maybe, just maybe, these aren't all copycat killers at all. And the player, of course, is now wondering what happens when the next carved number reaches 21 out of 21, and who is that last sacrifice? We can also find another note from Joseph at this point that says that he's sealed off the back of the storage room. We could then find that the hole that we usually use at the back of the bathroom is now blocked. Along with the note under the door is a succubus talisman. Succubus. Suck my butt, which Henry can place on this new mark in the laundry room, followed by placing the placards we have collected so far in their relevant spaces. In the centre, between the placard's indentations, is a note that says he carried out the ritual of the Holy Assumption. All other worlds forced their way into his universe, and at the deepest part of that universe is his mother. Filling the indentations with the appropriate placards creates a new hole that takes us to our next world. Henry is now in a hospital bed and we see the man in a blue coat with his hands in a corpse, now walking towards us in a very predatory-like manner. Escaping this room, we come to find that we are in St. Jerome's Hospital, the place where Eileen was taken back in our world, the apartment world, the real world. Eileen's belongings can also be found in the hallway, and in a separate room a board that has documentation and evidence of all of Eileen's injuries. As it's clear that this is where Eileen was taken, and there are signs of her still being here, we are now on the hunt for her. Upstairs we find a corridor. Now in this corridor is one single locked door, which we need to access in order to progress. To open the door we need to find a key, which is randomly placed in one of these other rooms in the corridor. No problem, I hear you say. How strange can a few rooms be? Ugh. Right, this is just ridiculous now. Okay. Now what is that? What the fuck? That's just weird. Ah, fuck! Alright, what is going on? Get out of the way, you fucking chairs! Key! Now that we found the key, we can enter Eileen's room, who we actually startle when she wakes up.
Eileen! Eileen, relax!
Henry, now having made sense of the various worlds that reconnect back to his apartment, tells Eileen that she must come with him, back to the room and out of this world, and that if she dies here, she'll die for real. Henry then goes through the nearby hole and wakes up alone. His apartment has a few notes, one from Joseph that tells him to return to the nightmare world and look for a door in order to get to the deepest parts of him. There's another note from Joseph in the room that gives more insight into the Walter Sullivan case and clarifies that Walter himself was the 11th victim of the 21 sacraments, despite there being more murders following his death. Joseph goes on to say that following Walter's death, each new victim kept their heart, something that Walter, up until his death, would take. Heading back through the hole, we return to Eileen, who says that we just disappeared. The pair talk about Joseph and his investigation into the Walter Sullivan case, Henry explaining to Eileen about the note that he received from Joseph just now in his apartment, telling him to go down into the deepest part of him, and to look for the ultimate truth. Eileen agrees to come with us as we begin our journey down, but she has warned us earlier that if she were to be left behind or attacked, she could become cursed. Eileen's curse status, as well as some other factors, can actually affect what ending we will get. So this is where we now have Eileen's support, or rather, she has ours, as we move ahead and kill various burping patients and continue to go down, until we eventually reach a door that leads to a windy and foggy staircase. This staircase is one we will revisit a few times here on in, where at the top is our current world which we are leaving, in the middle is a hole back to our apartment, and at the bottom is the door to the next world. It's also at this point where we can see hauntings frequently in our apartment, which we can fight off. The hauntings and how we deal with them is also another factor that can affect our ending. We move with Eileen down the staircase to our next destination. Now in the subway world for a second time, it feels almost comforting knowing exactly where we're going, or at least it did for me. This and the fact that we're now with Eileen makes this area feel a little easier to navigate, but that doesn't necessarily mean it makes it any less scary. As we explore the subway with Eileen, we revisit the turnstiles and come across a ghost. The ghosts in this game are all souls of Walter Sullivan's victims who roam these worlds. These ghosts have appeared throughout the game so far, and although they look different and represent different victims, all behave similarly. Their appearance feels more like a nuisance, just like other enemy types, rather than an actual event. This ghost that we're looking at, however, is a little more familiar, as this is the ghost of Cynthia, victim 16. She can use her hair to grab us in place, which is a bit of a pain, and the way we evade her is by wearing a saint medallion to reduce her damage, use a silver bullet to immobilise her for a while, or by using the sword of obedience to permanently pin her down. And these methods can all be used for each of the ghosts in the game. I, however, decided to just run away with Eileen. Heading to the room at the back of the train line, we enter a hole to get back to the room, in which we have some new notes. One is from Joseph, who tells us about the ghosts and how to evade them. Thanks, Joseph, I just covered that. And the other is from young Walter, who is asking his mum to wake up. He also gives her a key for a toy box that can be found on the train, and in this box we get a filthy coin, which we have to clean back in the apartment, allowing us to use it on a nearby vending machine, which gives us the murder scene key. This key lets us into the room where Cynthia was murdered, where we find and pick up the train handle that is then used on the King Street Line train to progress deeper. Through this door we trigger something that makes these next few areas slightly more annoying than they might have been otherwise. We see a vignette of the man in the blue coat now pointing towards us as he holds a weapon. That's right, he's now after us, so we make a move to our foggy staircase and back down to the next world. One thing I want to make clear to people who watch my videos is that I can't really cope well with panicked playstyles. What I mean by that is that once I get overwhelmed and begin to panic, my sense of strategy and motor skills is pretty much lost. Silent Hill, and most survival horror games for that matter, have this feeling in particular moments or some cases throughout the whole game. And if it isn't the ghostly hauntings, quests, or protecting Eileen that gets me to feel this way in this game, then what does? Well, it's this world. In our return to the forest world, we must face all of that which I just mentioned, plus the man in the blue coat now chasing us around trying to kill us. Meanwhile, we have to light our torches to see into various wells and collect doll parts within them, that we then place on a mannequin that is sat in the burned down orphanage. We must do this challenge whilst protecting Eileen and facing the regular enemies throughout the forest, as well as the ghost of Jasper, who is burning. As we explore the area for doll parts within the wells and come toward the side of the forest overlooking Toluca Lake, we encounter young Walter, who expresses his desire to reunite with his mother right where he was born.
That's what everybody calls me, but I don't really have a name or a home either.
Well, what about a mom or dad?
Yeah, but I never met them. They left South Ashfield Heights right after I was born. But soon I'll get to see my mom.
Do you know where she is now?
Yeah, of course. Right where I was born. Lots of people tried to stop me, but it's fine now. It says in the scriptures that I'll be with her. I gotta hurry. Mom's waiting.
We can then pick up a medallion that was on the statue that Walter was stood behind. Throughout the forest we can also find notes from Walter that Eileen reads out to us. These all tell of his experience at the orphanage, the teachings of the 21 Sacraments, where his mother is, and the round cell.
October 28th. I have to take a train or something to get to Ashfield. Everyone says Ashfield is a scary place, but I really want to see my mommy. Here goes. October 21st. Sunday is the day I leave the round cell to read the book. I read very well today. If I can do a good job reading the 21 Sacraments for the descent of the Holy Mother, I can meet my mother. The important lady told me that, but tomorrow I'm going to the round cell again.
Heading back to the burned-down orphanage, after escaping from this guy, we finally have a breather. Henry can place each doll part found in the wells onto the mannequin, causing it to fall back and reveal a staircase beneath the orphanage. Heading down the stairs, we can find the Halo of the Sun, a symbol not only seen throughout this game, but throughout the series as a symbol of the Order. There's also the rest of the scripture that we read earlier regarding the various signs of the 21 Sacraments. Using the crested medallion on a nearby door takes us back to the foggy staircase. As we revisit the room to restock our items, another note from Joseph is found at our front door. This one says that he believes Walter never died in prison. He can't quite tell who the police arrested instead, if not the real Walter Sullivan, but in any case, Joseph believes that he isn't dead. The note goes on to theorise that the man in the coat, who has been mentioned in various other notes and seen by many including Joseph, Frank, Richard and even us, he is the real Walter Sullivan. So here on in, the man in the coat we will call Walter Sullivan. Back outside of the apartment now, we return to the Walter prison world, or the round cell as described in Walter's forest notes. Walter is with us as we arrive and he chases us throughout the tower. Annoyingly, Eileen can't climb ladders, so we have to wait for her to run down this spiral ramp as Walter closes in on her. In an attempt to escape from Walter, we head to the basement only to discover a shirt. Andrew's shirt, which now has something written on it in wax, which we must wash back in the apartment in order to read. It says, "That guy, the fat one, took the basement key." We then find Andrew, who is presumably the fat guy. I don't say this because he's fat, I say it because his ghost is now shirtless. After a bit of rough and tumble, we take the key off him. Henry continues on toward the water prison generator room, only to find the small door at the end is guarded by 6 enemies. These are twin victims. These are my favourite enemies of this game, and they do appear here and there throughout the game, but this is the place where they are the most daunting. Fortunately, you can kind of edge them into coming out one by one, which is quite a lengthy tactic, but it means that we can progress back to our foggy staircase once more. Revisiting room 302, we have another page from Joseph's diary, this one telling us everything that he knows about Walter Sullivan so far. He was born right here in room 302 of South Ashfield Heights. His parents abandoned him soon afterwards and disappeared somewhere, leaving the baby alone. He was discovered and sent to St. Jerome's Hospital. He was adopted by Wish House, an orphanage in the forest near Silent Hill that's run by the secret Silent Hill religious cult. When he was 6 years old, someone from the cult showed him where he was born. Since then, he started to believe that room 302 itself, in other words, this room, was his mother. Every week, he travelled from the orphanage to South Ashfield Heights, a pretty long trip for a kid his age. Sometimes he took the subway, and sometimes the bus. Now everything is beginning to glue together. This explains young Walter's obsession with room 302. He believed that this apartment, our apartment, is his mother. But that still leaves us wondering what is to come of the 21 Sacraments. Moving into the building world now, there is a puzzle to solve. Henry finds a diary entry from Eric Walsh, victim 10 of the 21 Sacraments, called Reminisce, which mentions a birthday, a cat, a volleyball and a pool ball. Henry must find and collect the items corresponding to each of these aspects in Eric's past life. But first, we must face the ghost of Richard, who has appeared with aims to kill us, and we must beat him. Or just do that. Finding the items mentioned in the diary and placing them in their appropriate places throughout this world will turn a particular shop upside down which the player must navigate and escape. It's possible to skip this quest quite easily, however, even accidentally, just by pushing Eileen into a corner, looping around the building you're in, and she'll just end up with you ready to continue. Here we see Walter meeting young Walter as they meet one another and discuss what's been going on.
I'm going to see my mom. Stay out of my way. Who are you, anyway?
My name's Walter. Walter Sullivan. It's time to complete the 21 Sacraments.
But that's my name. And what are the 21 Sacraments?
Don't worry. You'll know soon enough. Well, let's go and see Mother.
Let me go, that hurts!
Up ahead is the bar that we revisited earlier, which I had to actually return to the apartment for in order to remember the code, but at least I got to appreciate this nice evening view. There was also a note from Joseph in the apartment that was a continuation of everything that he knew about Walter so far. He was describing the trip that Walter had to go through in order to reunite with his mother, the room. For years he would make that trip and hang around the apartments, almost like he was possessed, and would see other tenants here as obstacles, preventing him from seeing his mother. He became obsessed with a particular tract in the Order's Bible, the 21 Sacraments, and when he grew older, he set out to complete this ceremony and reunite with his mum once and for all. Now, using the code at the back of the bar, we head down and face the One Truth. This is a boss where 12 huge wallmen drop down from above against the metal panel. 11 of these wallmen are dummies, and attacking them will actually do nothing. Finding and attacking the one true wallman, however, will damage all 12 of them. I personally found this boss quite a pain, especially when trying to guard Eileen throughout it. It's not necessarily a tricky boss to understand, it's just not one that I can ever smoothly run through. Once the One Truth is finally defeated, we go through the guarded door back to our foggy staircase, where we return to our apartment and find another note from Joseph's diary, listing each victim of the 21 Sacraments, 20 and 21 being Eileen and Henry. And at the bottom of the staircase is a note beside the door. It's a page from Frank Sunderland's diary, the superintendent of South Ashfield Heights Apartments. He describes a dream that he had, one where the man in the coat is back in the apartments looking for his mother, crying. He details the dream in saying that the man in the coat was going up the stairs carrying a heavy tool, an old bowl, and a bag that was dripping with blood. Interestingly, the door we're about to go through is for room 302, and upon entering the room we see it's our apartment, but in a completely different state, like a dream or a memory of the apartment from the past. There's a picture book here that describes a child's abandonment, a story that is all too familiar to us by now. And beside it is a scripture which says the 21 Sacraments and the descent of the Holy Mother is really the descent of the devil. There are some more notes here which detail the experience of being within the room and the strange heavy feeling in the air. There is also a note that says Eileen is the mother's body and blood, representing the mother theme within the 21 Sacraments. The note also says that part of the mother's flesh is in the superintendent's room. The weirdest part about this room is that we actually meet Joseph, or at least his ghostly counterpart, who explains all he knows about the room, Walter, and what we need to do to stop him and the 21 Sacraments.
Find him. His true location. It must be nearby. You must kill him. Kill him. Kill. 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 Hurry. She's taken over. She's number 20. The mother is born.
Joseph has now warned us about what Walter's intentions are and that Eileen is possessed. He then tells us that we must kill Walter as we are guided towards the pickaxe of hope smashed into the wall at the back of the apartment that we pick up. Henry can now return to the normal apartment world and use the pickaxe on the same wall that we found it, revealing a secret room. In here we find Walter Sullivan's real body, crucified along with some important items. He's holding the keys of liberation, which is what we need to finally escape the room. The other important items include an obsidian goblet, a white chrism, and other books and items necessary for the ritual. What follows outside of the room is a fun quest to unlock the superintendent's room, which sees Henry now searching for various bodies throughout the apartments. When he interacts with one of the bodies, a chain is removed from the superintendent's front door. Finding all 6 will now unlock the door. During this search, Walter's past begins to show itself more than ever before. Not only has the apartment world transformed into this really uncomfortable appearance, but more enemies and ghosts roam the world too. We also hear snippets of Walter's dad, almost like a dwelling flashback, as they replay the moments where his dad expresses his hatred for baby Walter, and even the moment they abandon him.
Hurry up. Get that.
Eileen finds a journal and, whether through her caring nature or possession taking over, begins to feel sympathy for Walter. She understands that although he is the catalyst for various murders in the story, he himself is a victim of neglect and trauma, and decides that she needs to help him. Within the superintendent's room we can find and interact with the umbilical cord, as it was told in Joseph's previous note. Henry, now overwhelmed with hurt, breaks down as Eileen walks away, giving in to her possessed state. We now must return to room 302 and enter the secret room at the back to discover that Walter's crucified body is now gone, and beneath where it was is a depression, something that Henry says is inviting him in as he stares at it, like it's connected to another dimension. Entering this abyss brings Henry to a bright red room with another hole in the centre. This hole connects him to another huge room. In this room is a contraption known as the Death Machine, which was built by Walter himself. Surrounding the platform we're on is also a giant monster called the Conjured Creature, who is actually this world's incarnation of the real Walter Sullivan's crucified corpse. In this arena we also see Walter's ghost, the normal looking version of him, and elsewhere is young Walter who we can hear. We can also see Eileen as this scene plays out.
Henry, you're it. The last of the 21 sacraments. The final sign. The receiver of wisdom.
Onto the final battle itself, there's a few things that we need to be mindful of. The first being Eileen, who is walking towards the death machine and, as the name suggests, will die if she gets close to it. Depending on how well we supported her, or not, throughout the playthrough will determine how fast she walks towards the machine. As this happens, we must use the umbilical cord on the Conjurer, or Walter's real body, and gather the spears from the walls in this arena to stab him. Once the 8 spears are used, we are then free to do damage to the ghost version of Walter. We must do this all before Eileen dies, or else we get the bad endings to the game. Henry defeats Walter, who calls out for his mother one last time, as we then see young Walter knocking for her at room 302's front door before he vanishes. The door opens and we see Henry finally escaping the room in his own world. The next day plays a scene between Henry and Eileen in the hospital.
Thanks. Guess I'll have to find a new place to live, huh?
For those curious, this ending I've just shown is the escape ending. The ending that we can achieve is based on if Eileen lives or dies to the death machine and how many hauntings we cleared in the apartment throughout the game. The endings are Escape, Mother, where Eileen says she'll return to South Ashfield Heights before we see the room haunted once again. Eileen's Death, where exactly that happens.
4 of the victims were found dead at the scene, and the 5th victim, a Miss Eileen Galvin, was transported to St. Jerome's Hospital, where she died a short time later. Police say that Miss Galvin's injuries matched exactly those of the other victims.
And the 21 Sacraments ending, where we don't save Eileen and don't clear 80% of the hauntings, and the 21 Sacraments ritual is actually complete.
I'm home. I won't let anyone get in my way. Gonna stay with you forever.
I really liked the range of endings that we can unlock, as they feel personalised to whichever playstyle you had throughout the game. It's very similar to Silent Hill 1 and 2 in that respect, more so to the first game, as there is a clear range from best, good, bad and worst endings. My favourite ending was the 21 Sacraments ending, as it closes Walter's story exactly how he'd planned all along, and there's something quite satisfying about that after witnessing all that he'd been through throughout this story.
Heights Apartments. It is believed to be that of its occupant, Henry Townsend. The body was reportedly disfigured beyond recognition, making identification impossible.
This game presents players with a narrative that both intrigues and challenges, offering a unique take on the series. Now let's dive into the story's qualities, its adherence to the Silent Hill legacy, emotional impact, and whether I think it's a worthwhile experience for you to play. The story of this game stands out for its departure from what we know of the series so far. Each title has their own distinct narrative, but this one is worlds apart from what we're familiar with. Instead of centering on the town or even the protagonist itself, the game shifts focus to the personal journey of Walter Sullivan and the second-hand effects it has on the victims of Room 302 and the 21 Sacraments. This story is all about Walter Sullivan and the 21 Sacraments, and Henry just happens to be one of the victims caught up in this. I'm not devaluing Henry's experience by any means, but by exploring Walter a bit more and understanding his story, Henry's experience becomes easier to grasp and maybe even more impactful. He was born into an abusive and neglectful environment, growing up in the orphanage run by the Order, which had a lasting impact on his psyche. The biggest impact of all comes from when he was a child, as he mistook what he was told about his own mother. Walter considered the room that he was abandoned in to be his actual mother. This delusion, coupled with the Order's teachings, led him on a path of following the 21 Sacraments for the descent of the Holy Mother, believing that performing rituals would bring him salvation and a reunion he desperately sought. He was certain that he could be with his mother once again, thanks to Dahlia Gillespie, the priestess of the cult, who told Walter that he could wake his mother by completing these 21 sacraments. Walter's backstory is tinged with his yearning for connection and reunion. He believed that by carrying out these gruesome rituals, he could be united with his mother. This desire for reconnection stems from the deep emotional wounds that he suffered as a child. Walter's backstory adds a layer of emotional complexity to the game. It explores themes of loneliness, trauma, and the lengths one might go to find solace in the face of overwhelming pain. The narrative's details unravel as players explore and uncover the mysteries piece by piece. This gradual revelation keeps players engaged and curious, propelling them forward in their quest for understanding and for Henry's freedom. However, the unconventional structure might challenge players accustomed to the more linear storytelling approach. This, coupled with the back and forth gameplay, might turn some players away. And so we have to ask, is this a good story? This game offers a unique narrative perspective that fits well within the Silent Hill series in my opinion, as it retains the series' thematic depth and psychological horror elements, and it explores the interesting and emotional effects of the Order. This game offers a departure from the conventional Silent Hill narrative, exploring a personal journey in a more confined setting. Players who appreciate psychological horror, character-driven stories, and unconventional gameplay mechanics will really enjoy this. Whilst it might not be the most traditional Silent Hill experience, its emotional depth, eerie atmosphere, and unique narrative structure makes it a worthy addition to the series. And so, if you're open to a different perspective within the Silent Hill series, this game is worth playing in my opinion. For me personally, it was rather difficult to get into first of all, but I found myself more and more curious as the story continued, and I felt obsessed with the need for freedom and uncovering more about the room. So with our post-story thoughts concluded, let's now explore different elements of this title. The menus and UI of Silent Hill 4 follow this game's trend of being unique compared to previous titles. The main menu immediately presents itself with music and movements that are different to what I was accustomed to. Usually I expect silence or very subtle noises if that, but this main menu felt like it demanded my attention a lot more than other titles. Within the options menu, we can find typical selections like brightness and language, but we may also find options for the noise effects within the game, and of course my favourite, blood colour. Silent Hill 4 also offers options for its unique first-person view, such as head motion. You will find this aged digital font being used a lot throughout the entire game, which immediately stood out for me personally. I'm not quite sure why, and I almost feel silly even highlighting it, but it really did stand out compared to the fonts of previous titles. They at least had some consistency in the type used in particular places, but Silent Hill 4 made me feel slightly uneased when reading notes as we get this thin, scrawly typewriting. The health bar is a nice touch to Silent Hill 4 and encourages the action-based gameplay I've mentioned throughout this retrospective. Silent Hill 3 did have a health bar and stamina bar which you could unlock and apply, but in this game it's already there. I must admit, I don't really care too much for it being there or not, and much prefer it just being an optional extra, but that's just my preference. The actual inventory menu within this game is different. You have this 10 item selection at the bottom of your screen which can be cycled through. This helped with the development team's ambition of not breaking immersion, which was achieved once I got used to it. I actually really like the fact that we can only hold so many items in this game. It made me feel like I was actually in Henry's shoes. In previous games, there was no limit to how many items you could hold, and this could break that sense of immersion which was felt in Silent Hill 4. The item chest is the storage for everything you collect throughout the game. If you have a gun, you can put that here. A piece for a puzzle? Get it in there. A bottle of chocolate milk? Whack her in there. As we have a limited inventory selection during gameplay, there needed to be a way for us to manage it, and the item chest is how we do that. Easy to find next to the TV in the living room and neatly organised into these categories. I quite like the addition of the items chest and would have loved to have played the other titles with this implemented. Having to strategically think of what's coming up next adds to the immersion and further sense of control. In this game we also have a scrapbook menu, used to store all of the memos we find throughout the game. It's very easy to access and fun to go back to once you find other parts of a particular story, whether that's more information of a character or location's history. I do love these sorts of things. The game even encourages you to collect these beyond the general curiosity factor, as the scrapbook, more specifically the memos in the amount you collect, can affect the ranking you achieve at the end of the game. The pause menu is similar to other titles with a freeze frame of the current gameplay and typical selections. And so the menu and UI design in Silent Hill 4 The Room have both strengths and weaknesses. This game features a menu system that can be accessed through the protagonist's apartment, which adds an interesting layer of immersion as it ties into the game's central theme of being trapped. However, some players have found it to be a bit convoluted and less intuitive compared to the other more straightforward menus that previous titles of the series had. In terms of adding to the tension and immersion, the menu design of this game does have some mixed opinions. On one hand, the unconventional approach of accessing the inventory and other options for the apartment can create a sense of unease and make players feel a bit more connected to the protagonist's struggle. On the other hand, this unique approach might feel a bit cumbersome to players, potentially breaking immersion during intense moments when you need to manage your inventory quickly. Overall, Silent Hill 4's menu and UI design has a polarizing effect. It adds an intriguing layer of thematic immersion, but might seem a bit less intuitive by players accustomed to a more traditional menu system. It's important to note that players' preferences can vary, so some may find it adds to the tension and atmosphere, whilst others might feel it hinders their gameplay experience. In this segment, we'll take a look at all of the weapons available in Silent Hill 4 The Room. The wine bottle, and broken wine bottle. A very small weapon which is found in the fridge, and eventually broken due to damage. It can affect enemies with its sharp edges and is quick to swing, however it does do little damage overall. The steel pipe. This weapon is pretty easy to use and has decent reach. It's not that powerful, but it is good to keep most enemies back for a brief moment. The stun gun. A useful weapon found in the water prison world, the stun gun requires no batteries or ammunition and can offer a lot of power. It's even capable of knocking over enemies in a single zap. That said, it is rather slow to use. The aluminum bat. This bat comes with a fun moveset which contains wide and overhead swings, which offer moderate damage, which can increase after being charged up. The spade. The ordinary digging spade has very good reach and can offer moderate damage. This weapon is incredibly useful as it can still do decent damage to downed enemies, so Henry is pretty protected whilst using this, especially when he charges up his attacks. The rusty axe. The rusty axe is a heavy and powerful weapon. Its weighty strikes can deal significant damage to enemies, making it effective for dispatching foes quickly. However, its swing speed is relatively slow, so timing your attacks is crucial to avoid being overwhelmed. The bug spray. The bug spray serves as an unconventional weapon in the room. Whilst it might seem less threatening, it can be used to temporarily blind enemies, impairing their ability to attack. This gives you a window to strike or make an escape. It's not the most damaging weapon, but its utility lies in its crowd control potential. The paper cutting knife. The paper cutting knife is a small, swift weapon that's easy to wield. While it lacks raw power, its speed and quick attacks can make it a useful weapon whilst whittling down enemy health over time. It's more suitable for dealing with weaker opponents or chipping away at stronger ones. The torch. The torch is both a light source and a weapon. Whilst its damage output is limited, it can ignite enemies, causing them to take additional damage over time. It's particularly effective against enemies vulnerable to fire. Its dual functionality makes it a versatile tool in your arsenal. The Pickaxe of Despair. The Pickaxe of Despair is a heavy and intimidating weapon. Its formidable swings deal high damage, making it capable of taking down enemies swiftly. However, its weight makes it somewhat slower to wield. When you need to eliminate enemies efficiently, this weapon can be a go-to choice. The Chainsaw. The Chainsaw is a fearsome weapon with immense damage potential. Its rapid cutting action can quickly dismantle enemies, making it a force to be reckoned with. However, its limited availability and the fact that it's somewhat slow to swing means you should use it strategically. The golf clubs and all 12 variations of the golf clubs. The assortment of golf clubs offer a mix of reach and damage potential. Whilst they share the basic golf club mechanics, the different variations offer distinct animations and damage outputs. Generally, golf clubs are moderate in both swing speed and damage, making them versatile options for various combat situations. Now let's look at the firearms of Silent Hill 4. The pistol. The pistol is a reliable firearm that offers moderate damage per shot. It provides a ranged option for dealing with enemies, allowing you to maintain distance while still inflicting damage. Its accuracy and decent damage output makes it a staple choice for many encounters. Richard's Revolver. Richard's Revolver is a more potent version of the standard pistol. It packs higher damage per shot, making it effective for dispatching enemies more quickly. Its increased power comes at the cost of reduced ammunition capacity, so accuracy and ammo management are important. There are also some extra weapons that you can unlock and give to Eileen for those moments where she is accompanying you. These include her bag, a riding crop, a chain, a nightstick, and even a submachine gun. The game impresses with its variety of weapons, catering to different playstyles and strategies, from traditional melee weapons like the steel pipe and rusty axe, to unconventional choices like bug sprays and Eileen's bag. There's something for everyone. This range adds some depth to the combat encounters, allowing players to tailor their approach to specific situations. The inclusion of Eileen's weapons also adds an interesting dynamic, giving her a distinct role in battles. Unlike some other survival horror titles, Silent Hill 4 emphasises utility over raw damage. Weapons like the bug spray and torch showcase this approach, offering strategic advantages beyond just dealing harm. So, how do I feel about the weapons in this game? Well, the emphasis on utility, combined with the mix of traditional and unconventional choices, speaks to what I've mentioned throughout this retrospective. The game is the same, but different, with weapons that remind me of previous titles and features that are also entirely original. In comparison to those other titles, I did enjoy the range of weapons available and think the tools I had to hand was exactly what I wanted from a Silent Hill game. Overall, I really did like the weapons I had in Silent Hill 4. In this segment, we'll take a look at all of the unlockables available in Silent Hill 4. Please do bear in mind that all of the unlockables in this game can only be accessed through a new fair game. Let's begin with the game modes. 1 Weapon Mode. Once you've conquered the game on hard difficulty and attained an impressive 10-star rank, equivalent to 100 small stars, you'll unlock the option to engage in 1 Weapon Mode when starting a new fair game. This unique mode presents Henry with a choice to select a single weapon as he enters the subway world. At the base of the long escalator, you will find 11 weapons laid out. However, it's important to note that picking up one of these weapons will cause all of the others to vanish. Consequently, Henry will only have this one weapon at his disposal. The All Weapon Mode. Achieving a 10-star rank again upon conquering 1 Weapon Mode grants access to the All Weapon Mode. In this mode, the initial scene in the subway world remains consistent. However, now you're free to collect any of the available weapons whenever you choose, with the exception of the pistol, torch and golf clubs. Additionally, there's an extra advantage. Henry's fridge will consistently contain 10 health drinks, and the laundry room will hold 6 clips of pistol bullets every time he returns to room 302. 2 of the weapons that I previously listed are actually unlockables, and both become available during a new fair game. This is the chainsaw and the submachine gun, which is for Eileen. I think these weapons are okay as unlockables, but look, they ain't no hyper spray or beam saber. There's also 2 costumes that you can unlock as well, one for Eileen and one for Cynthia. They both follow a similar theme, if you see what I mean. Although there are only 2 unlockable outfits in this game, I am more than happy with what we've been given. Also, I was actually hesitant to add this detail in, but fuck it. There's also advanced jiggle physics that are visible in these outfits. This game's unlockables are a bit of a mixed bag for me. Whilst most of them are pretty cool, especially the new game modes, which I really did enjoy, I'm not sure if there is really enough here to warrant more than an extra playthrough. While some unlockables add an extra layer of fun and ability, others might leave you questioning their significance. And look, I'm not suggesting that every unlockable has to be massively game changing, by the way. I just feel that there was quite a lack of unlockables overall, and so my experience didn't really change when they were applied. In the end, Silent Hill 4 The Room's unlockables add an extra layer of thrill, but might leave you wanting more. They boost some replayability in new modes, but whether they're worth it depends on your taste for new challenges and the joy of using different weapons and seeing jiggle physics. Silent Hill 4 The Room continued the series' tradition of masterfully crafted soundscapes. This time, renowned composer Akira Yamaoka, the musical genius behind previous Silent Hill titles, collaborated with artist Joe Ramersa and Mary Elizabeth McGlynn to create an evocative and unsettling musical experience. Akira Yamaoka, known for his unique fusion of musical styles, joined forces with Joe Ramersa, the series' vocal director and lyricist, and Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, a versatile singer and performer. Together, this trio crafted a remarkable soundtrack that seamlessly blended ambient sounds, industrial textures, and emotive vocals, setting the perfect tone for psychological horrors within Silent Hill 4 The Room.
Hey there, little Walter. Just a little longer now.
Henry, you're it. The last of the 21 sacraments. The final sign.
Silent Hill 4's soundtrack is characterised by its haunting melodies and gripping vocals. The main theme, Room of Angels, sung by McGlynn, captures the game's themes of loss, longing and despair. The mournful, ethereal vocals, combined with Yamaoka's evocative instrumentals, serve as a haunting reminder of the game's emotional depth.
You lie, silent there before me. Your tears, they mean nothing to me. The wind howling at the window.
One of the most evocative tracks in Silent Hill 4 The Room is Tender Sugar, a song that plays during important narrative moments. The hauntingly beautiful vocals performed by McGlynn intertwine with Akira Yamaoka's atmospheric instrumentals, creating a sense of both sorrow and hope. The lyrics seem to depict a yearning for solace and connection amid a world of darkness and despair. They resonate with the protagonist, Henry, who finds himself trapped in his apartment and haunted by malevolent spirits of Silent Hill.
Up or down! Never know it's an illusion! Running around! On and on! Every day spins my confusion! Not again! Not again! Not again!
Resting comfortably elicits powerful emotions and adds a layer of humanity to the characters' struggles. As players progress through the game, the melancholic atmosphere of resting comfortably resonates with the underlying themes of loss and desire for peace and understanding. It plays at a moment where the player must interact with these various corpses and audio snippets of Walter's father abandoning him all those years ago.
Told you we shouldn't have a baby, didn't I? Hurry up. Get that.
Beyond the melodic tracks, Silent Hill 4's sound design contributed immensely to its immersive horror experience. The ambient soundscapes created by Akira Yamaoka envelopes players in a world of nightmarish tension and unease. Each creaking floorboard, distant whisper and echoing footstep serves to heighten the player's sense of isolation and fear. Like other Silent Hill titles before this game's soundtrack was recorded using a mix of unconventional instruments like metal sheets and chains. Now, if you play this game and think that it's not a true Silent Hill, even now, I would give you a pass if that's down to the gameplay. I could even consider that opinion if it's based on the story alone, but the sound design of this game is undeniably Silent Hill. And yes, that is down to Yamaoka, but it's also down to how well the original soundtrack complements key moments during the story. Also, by the way, the original soundtrack covers are pretty cool too. Look at these. And look at this one. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Overall, I love the sound of this game through and through. And like other titles, the music is quite possibly my favourite part of it all. Players control the main character from a first-person perspective within Room 302, and third-person outside of this. The first-person perspective is a welcome addition and generally simple to understand, with players able to walk and interact with objects in the environment and fight monsters. We'll speak more on the combat in a moment. A significant portion of the game takes place in Henry's apartment, which serves as a central hub. Players can explore the apartment, interact with various objects, and uncover clues and information about the mysterious events unfolding in the game. The apartment is a safe space, but it can become haunted. During these segments, the environment becomes distorted and dangerous, creating intense and terrifying situations for the player. It can be identified by the groaning and static-like noises, as well as there being an obvious disturbance within the apartment itself. Whether it be a ghost child in the closet, a man bursting through the walls, or a dripping tap, the player has to repel these hauntings by placing a candle or wearing a saint medallion. This side task was a fun extra which often got in the way of simply returning to the apartment to save at times, but it was cool to see the various hauntings around the room. This game also incorporates an inventory system which allows the player to carry limited items. Players must manage their inventory efficiently, as they will need different items to solve puzzles, defend against enemies, and progress through the story. It was a nice touch having to return to the apartment to store and retrieve particular items. It was also interesting to play as a character who doesn't carry an obscene amount of weaponry at any one time. Later in the game, the player teams up with Eileen Galvin. Managing Eileen's safety and well-being becomes crucial, as she can be harmed during encounters with enemies. Protecting Eileen adds an extra layer of challenge and tension to the gameplay, which was a really fun and interesting idea, but also a fucking nightmare when put into practice. If she is about 5 meters or more away from you and you advance to the next section, she'll be left behind. She can also at this point continue to take damage. This means you have to be very swift and accurate in taking out enemies, so both of you can make it toward the next area together. Opinions on Silent Hill 4's combat mechanics are quite divided among players and critics. Some players appreciate the changes made to the combat in this installment, while others felt they fall short compared to previous games of the series. The switch to a first-person perspective brought a sense of immersion and vulnerability, making ghostly encounters more tense and frightening than they would have been otherwise. Players felt more intimately connected with the character's experience and feared the unknown lurking in the room. The combat encounters remained challenging, and the limited ammunition and healing items heightened the sense of desperation and resource management, keeping players on edge, which is what you should feel in a Silent Hill game in my opinion. Silent Hill 4's unique hauntings mechanic added variety to the combat experience, and an extra layer of strategy and unpredictability. Especially ghosts that existed outside of the room, who could only be pinned down using the Sword of Obedience. Some players found the controls to be clunky and imprecise, particularly during combat. The first-person perspective, whilst it did enhance the horror atmosphere, could sometimes hinder players' ability to maneuver effectively in intense situations. Silent Hill 4 had a higher number of combat encounters compared to previous titles. Some players felt that combat became repetitive, as they had to face similar enemies frequently, leading to a potential sense of repetition. While the inclusion of Eileen Galvin as a partner added an emotional element to the gameplay, it also introduced frustrations. Players had to protect Eileen from harm, but her AI behaviour could be unpredictable at times, leading to scenarios where she would get hurt and the player had limited control over her actions. Overall, the combat mechanics in Silent Hill 4 received mixed reviews. Some players enjoyed the heightened tensions and vulnerability brought on by the first-person perspective, as well as the psychological horror elements of the game. On the other hand, the clunky controls and repetitive combat encounters were aspects that some players criticised. Opinions on the combat mechanics can be influenced by individual preferences, as some players may have preferred the combat style in earlier Silent Hill games. Ultimately, the reception of the combat mechanics in Silent Hill 4 remains subjective and dependent on the player's tastes and expectations. Finally, Silent Hill 4 The Room presents a unique and haunting experience within the Silent Hill series and the survival horror genre. Whilst the first-person perspective and the room concept set apart from its predecessors, the control scheme might not be everyone's cup of tea. In my opinion, the controls and interactions of this game are fine, and complaints that the controls ruin the game entirely are sort of hard to believe. Don't get me wrong, you can certainly feel the difference when comparing this title to other games of the series, but it hardly feels like you're at a major disadvantage because of it. It's not the smoothest, I'll grant that, but in a single word the controls and interactions are fine and kind of what I expected from this title. And I say that as I show a clip of me being stuck behind Walter's body. Silent Hill 4 The Room takes a departure from the traditional formula of the series, offering a unique and unsettling experience that is both intriguing and challenging for players. Set within the confines of an apartment, the game introduces a sense of claustrophobia that adds to the overall sense of unease. The narrative centres around Henry Townsend, who finds himself trapped in this apartment, only to discover that it has become a portal to the otherworldly and disturbing dimensions. This twist on the usual Silent Hill environment offers a fresh take to the psychological horror elements the series is known for. Silent Hill 4 introduces new gameplay mechanics, like the first-person perspective during certain segments and a reliance on a protective item, and having to protect Eileen Galvin, which adds an extra layer of strategy to the game. While these changes were met with mixed reactions from fans accustomed to the series' established mechanics, they do contribute to the game's distinctive atmosphere. The visuals and sound design of Silent Hill The Room excel in creating an atmosphere of dread and unease. The environments are hauntingly detailed, and the sound design, featuring eerie sound effects and unsettling ambient music, further enhances the unsettling atmosphere. However, some players felt that the shift in focus from the town of Silent Hill itself to the apartment limited the game's exploration and scope. Additionally, the inventory management system and combat mechanics received criticism for their sometimes clunky implementation. In conclusion, Silent Hill 4 The Room is a divisive entry in the series. While it does deviate from the familiar formula, its unique approach to storytelling, psychological horror, and unsettling atmosphere still managed to deliver a memorable and disturbing experience for those who are willing to embrace its unconventional elements. As a final note from me, I absolutely recommend it, especially if you have played the other games of the series. Its unique approach to Silent Hill themes, both new and old, will have you uncomfortable in ways that are new yet not off-putting. Be open-minded and embrace the differences this title has to offer, and you will have a blast. I strongly encourage you to play at a slower pace than you might otherwise in other horror games. Despite it being more of an action-focused title of the series, I did find that I missed one or two important pieces across various playthroughs, so tread lightly across the apartment. Overall though, Silent Hill 4 The Room is great. As always, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video and had fun playing this game with me. If you've stuck with me throughout this journey, please can you leave a comment below saying, "Round of applause for Hillside," as I'd really like to see who gets this secret message. You can also leave your suggestions for the next Silent Hill video below, whether that be a new topic entirely or which game you would like to see me cover next time as a full retrospective. I would also like to extend my thanks to those who have subscribed, as you encourage me to make videos just like this one. There's not much more for me to say, however I really want to reach an hour and a half just because I like round numbers. You know, maybe this is actually what it's like being locked into a room for such a long time. Thanks once again, and I'll see you in the next video.